Hello and welcome. My name is Joe Fonts. I'm a systems engineer with Cato Networks, and today we're going to be talking about the Cato Sentinel integration using Cato Sentinel Connect. All right, let's get into it. And we're going to go to the Microsoft Sentinel integration. Now, the easiest thing to do is if we right click and open a new tab, if we open a couple of these, what we're going to do is keep one tab open with the instructions for the deployment and the other one open with our actual deployment template. So now that we have these open, and I'll put the link to the GitHub page in the video, but this is a public GitHub page. You can find it on your search engine, and it is the Cato Sentinel Connect project, publicly available. From here, we will be deploying an Azure template. Now, in order to do that, we're going to need some pieces of information. You're going to need to have your Azure subscription where you want this to be deployed. It must be the same subscription that you use to do your Azure Sentinel integration. The same thing with the resource group. So you want to select the same resource group as your Sentinel integration. Here I've used Sentinel Test 01, as well as the same region. So next we're going to need to get our account ID, API key, and determine our URL. So as we can see from our URL, we have a number in there. This is going to be our account ID. So you want to make sure that you copy that and put it in a password manager that we're going to leverage in order to save this and the API key. We also have to ensure that the events integration is enabled. So if we go to resources and then down to event integrations, we want to ensure that this checkbox is green over here, that it's enabled. This is what allows us from Azure, once we do the deployment, to query our API and bring data into your Azure account. If this is not enabled, we won't be able to get the data even with your API key. So ensure that this is enabled. Outside of the scope of this particular deployment, we also have the option here to bring that event data into separate locations. So if you wanted to put this event data, all of the events that are taking place in your Cato account, into Azure Blob Storage, Amazon S3, or directly into Log Analytics Workspaces in Azure, you can do that directly. Just click on New, select your destination, and you can get going in that. As I mentioned, that's outside the scope of this, but I just wanted all the viewers to be aware. Now that we've ensured that the event integration is enabled, we're going to click on API keys, and we're going to create an associated API key. So name it whatever you would want. We only need view permissions here because we're only reading data to bring into Azure. And then for the expires on, select some point in the future so that we don't have a key expiry. Click apply. Once we click apply here, the key that's created is only going to be displayed once. So you want to ensure that you copy that key and save it to your password manager so that you can use it for the next steps as well as in the future. So from there, we now have all the data that we need in order to begin the process. So from the GitHub page, there's a button here that says deploy to Azure. So we're just going to click that. And you're going to see that when this page comes up, it's going to reflect the instructions that we have over here. And all of these elements are documented below. So if you have any questions about them, they are on the public GitHub page. But we're going to walk through it real quick as soon as this loads up over here. So our resource group, as I mentioned, it should be the same resource group into which you have deployed Azure Sentinel. So in my example, I have deployed that into Sentinel Test 01. Very creative naming. We're going to get our Cato account ID. As I mentioned, within CMA, it's that number up here. I don't have a lot of data in this account, so I'm going to use a separate one for this purpose. And then we're going, that account key, that API key that was only shown once, we're going to copy that, just as mentioned, out of your password manager into this location. For the Cato API URL, if we look at our CMA, we'll see that I'm just using the standard Cato region. If you are using a separate region, for instance, US1 or something like that, you may want to change this to US1, but by default, we're just going to leave this according to the default entry that you have in here. The next thing we need is our Sentinel Workspace name. So if we go into Sentinel, we look up we're going to go to our resource groups, and we're going to select the resource group into which you have deployed Azure Sentinel. We're going to look for our Log Analytics Workspace, click on that, and this name is what we're going to need. So we're going to copy our name. So this is the Log Analytics Workspace name that Sentinel is using, which we are also going to use. This is the location of all those tables of data. So we're going to paste that in there. The Cato Event Engine name, this is for your internal use. I don't know, just call it whatever you want. Just make sure it's something that you remember. Next thing is the service plan type. So there are 3 options here. I would just leave it as the default of dynamic unless you have a reason to change it. Dynamic, you have limited numbers of dynamically allocated slots in your Azure account service plans. So if dynamic's being used for another solution, you can use basic in this example. I'm just going to stick to dynamic over here. For the Cato events, these are Boolean values, true, false, yes, no. So whether or not, and this is documented in the GitHub page, so do we want to bring in the Cato events? Do we want to bring in not just the events, but do we want to put them into the Azure Sentinel Common Security Log table? And that's going to become important and apparent later. But yes, if you're using Azure Sentinel, you should do this. Not every customer will need this feature, but by default, it's good to have on. Next up, so these are the Cato events over here. So that's all of the events that are generated in the platform brought into Azure Sentinel. In addition, do you want to bring in your audit data? So admins that have changed things throughout your laptop, throughout your environment, do we want to have those changes documented in your Log Analytics Workspace? I would argue yes. If you have a Cato XOps license, do you want to bring in the XDR data as Cato stories into Log Analytics Workspace? We're just going to set that as true. And then from here, we have the option to set up the Cato event filter. Now it's documented over here, some of the field options. So this is, do we want to bring in all event data, or do we want to bring in a subset of event data? So in this example, if you used this string, it would bring in only security events. Or if we use this string, it will only bring in connectivity events. So you can create your own filters that limit the data that's coming in. So we use AND statements to receive only security and connectivity data. And so this is pretty extensible to allow you to reduce the data that's being brought into your Azure Sentinel environment. In our example here, we're going to leave it blank because we want to bring in everything. So next we're going to click on Review and Create. The data within the template is being validated as well as the template itself. If you want to find out what's actually being deployed, we can go into the GitHub page, click on the Cato deploy JSON. This is the ARM template, and it's freely available to use, modify as you would like to. And here you can deploy this template yourself. You don't have to use the button. You can copy and paste this template into Azure as deploy custom template, and you can make changes to whatever fits your need. But by default, this is the template available that deploys the needed resources. So now that we have validated our template, we're going to click on Create. And this is going to create those resources that we need in order to complete the integration. So we're going to let this run through its process, and we will sync back up in a second. All right, welcome back. So as we can see, our deployment has completed, and now all of our resources have been deployed so that we can proceed with the next section. So one of the things we want to take a look at is the data coming in. So if we go to our Sentinel Test 01 Log Analytics Workspace, we're going to see that there are logs being brought in. Now, when you first deploy the connector, The order of operations is that it will start bringing in Cato event data. Once it gets up to speed on the Cato event data, it will then start on the Cato audit data. And then once that is complete, typically, a few times a day, it will bring in the Cato XDR story data. So we're going to start with, we're going to look at the tables. We're going to start with the built-in Microsoft Sentinel defined common security log table. So if we just run this query, we're just going to see what's in the table itself. This table is in the format defined by Microsoft for the common event format. So Microsoft has put out guidelines that indicate the types of data that go into each of these fields. What we at Cato do is we take our native event feed format and then convert it to the common event format in order to bring it into this table that Azure Sentinel understands how to use. So it's able to leverage this data because it's in the format that Sentinel understands. If we wanted to look at the standard Cato event format, that's brought into a custom table. So that's in the event engine table. And we can see that each of these elements is under a dynamic table row type called log data. Now, each Cato event that is generated might be different from one another, so they'll have different number of fields. So the number of fields underneath log data is specific to that particular event element that has been generated. So, and this is the native Cato format into which these have been created. And so all of the events are specific to, their specific types. So in this one, we're looking at an exchange event that contains more fields than the previous one, which was just an API login successful. So we can see that there's different number of fields. This is automatically ingested into this dynamic field. So we just go into log data and we can see all the data that's in there. Next, we look at the audit data that's been generated. So the Cato audit engine, if we look in there, we can see all the changes that have been made in the platform. Once again, it's a dynamic field where this is all placed. It's under audit data. And so we can gather all of the information over here. And then finally, if we have Cato XOps enabled and we have XDR data, we can run a report that will view the data received or data gathered from the XDR API and brought into Azure Log Analytics Workspaces. Now, in here, the majority of the data is under another dynamic column called story data. This is a deeply nested object that contains all of the XDR data that's present in the Cato CMA application, the dashboard that you may have experience with. This breaks down the individual incidents. You can drill down into these as well. You can look at the timeline, the activities, if somebody's working the story. All of that data will be present in this story data object, which goes down deeply so that it encompasses all of the story data. So one of the questions we get is, well, how do we parse the XDR data specifically? Or are there example queries that we can use for the events data, that type of thing? And so the way that we do that is by showing it in an application. So if we go back to our GitHub page, we scroll all the way to the bottom, almost to the bottom. We can deploy a visualization workbook in Azure that contains the queries so that we can model those for our own custom reports, or we can use them for our custom alerting. But we're going to deploy this workbook to your Azure account so that you can create the visualizations. So we're going to click on Deploy to Azure, and we are going to gather the data necessary to deploy the template. Once again, we have, if we scroll all the way down here, we see some of the data that's required. Same thing. We want to use the same subscription where your Azure Sentinel installation is completed, same resource group, pick your own workbook display name, and then paste in your Sentinel Workspace name. So once again, I'm going to select my Sentinel Test 01 because that's where I deployed deployed Sentinel. It's in the US West 2 region. I'm going to set a display name so that we can find it later. We're going to say 11. Did I do that? 11-04-2025. If I could learn to type today. And then we're going to copy, just like we did with the last template deployment. We're going to copy the Log Analytics Workspace name that we're using and paste it into the bottom over here. And you can leave these other elements by default. So we're going to review and create. It's going to verify the data as well as the ARM template and provide us with a create button. And so this is going to deploy. We'll give this a second. All right, so this was a much faster deployment because it's just a workbook. So now if we go to our Azure workbooks, we see a new element that is, there it is, our new workbook that's been created for 11/4/2025. We can open this workbook, maximize screen. And this will provide us with reports based upon the data that's been ingested. So all of that data that we saw in, stories engine, audit engine, event engine, all of this is presented in a graphical format so that you're able to kind of look into it. So if you want to find out, well, how do I, for instance, replicate this specific report, trying to find out these unique elements or, stories by criticality, that type of thing. If we click on edit, all of the KQL queries for these pieces are included in the workbook itself. So you can see over here, this is the query to generate the table above. As we scroll down, this is the query to generate this table. And so these are some of the basic high-level queries for the dashboard. Where this becomes super helpful is within those deeply nested elements that we were talking about, such as XDR stories. So we're going to pick a story at random. So I'm going to say malware activity found. And so this story here contains a lot of data in it. You've got multiple time elements, you've got a lot of related events, attack targets. And so if you want to understand how to parse that story object to gather this data, you could just click on edit, go through and pull out the elements that you want to get specifically. Maybe it's this one over here. And you can copy and utilize this KQL query in your own reports, in your own dashboards, and that becomes usable within your organization, not just for visualization, but also to understand the format of the table. And so all of this is available throughout all of these story elements over here. If you want to pull out, the attack targets, for instance, you can grab the KQL query from here. Same thing for the related events field. So this gives you an idea of different ways that you can leverage the data directly in the workbook that's provided. And once again, that's just in the public GitHub page, so you have full access to it. If you want to see how the workbooks break down, we have the workbook gallery templates and the actual deployment templates as public templates directly in that GitHub page. And then from there, you now have all of your data streaming into your Log Analytics Workspace, into the common security log for Microsoft Azure Sentinel, and you should be all set to go. So thank you very much for taking the time today. If there's any questions, please reach out to your systems engineer, any of the Cato technical team members. We'd be happy to engage in a conversation, and let us know if there's any enhancements or any other pieces of information we can provide. All right, thanks a lot.